Hello, everybody. It's 5 o'clock by my account. So, with that being said, we're going to roll right into our next little lesson and go through some uh, different things here today live. And what I have planned for today is actually one of my favorite activities as a freelancer and videographer, which is putting together a demo reel for the year. And this is super exciting because it's a chance to showcase what you've done previously, and all the legwork is pretty much done for you. So it's a exciting thing to put together, and it's a good thing to look back on and kind of like reminisce over what you've done in the past year. So that's really enjoyable, and it's also a really important piece of work to put out because it is the thing that you're going to use to represent yourself as a freelancer. So having a good solid demo reel is very, very crucial when you first start out. And I've used my previous demo reel to get a lot of work and, you know, in job interviews and various things like that. So it is a very important thing to have and make along the way. In my class that starts tomorrow, that is one of the options for the final is to make your own demo reel to be able to put on your resumes and send out to clients potentially and use that to represent yourself. Uh, so yeah, without further ado, I have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to hop right in and show you guys kind of the process that I go through to do these. And so usually it's common practice to do these once a year. I haven't updated mine since I graduated college because there's a period of time where I had a lot of trouble finding steady videography work. Thankfully now I have enough to kind of update this demo reel that I've been using for a long time. So we're going to start on that. And so basically what a demo reel is it's a showcase of your previous work, and it pays attention to pacing, and it showcases what you intend to focus on during the course of that year and in the future. Now the only reason I wrote that overview is to kind of hammer home the point that, again, this is what you use to represent yourself and your work. So in your demo reel, you should pay close attention to what you want to represent yourself with. And then I always make a list of focal points that I want to focus on throughout the course of the demo reel and plan it out accordingly, according to what I have and what I'd like to establish. So with that being said, my focal points for this specific demo reel that I'm about to start is I'd like to continue focusing on my work with small businesses. Secondary to that, I do a lot of live production work, so we're going to feature that heavily. And also, I'd like to highlight my work with the Cave Collective so far. So I have those as my three primary focal points that we'll be going through. And secondary to that would be the things that I wouldn't consider myself focusing on, but I would like to still include to let people know that these options are available if they were to reach out to me. And those are things like real estate photo and video, wedding video, and I have a collection of photos and small films and skits that I've worked on in the past. And also it's really important in a demo reel to demonstrate that you have had uh, clients that are willing to put their name and associate it with yours and trust you with what you have done because that lends credit to what you've done. So I just kind of put together a small list of clients that I've worked for in the past and still currently associate with, and that's Smokes and Things and Spearfish and Sturgis, right here at the Cave Collective. One of my previous projects was a commercial I made for Good Day Cafe in Spearfish, which is under the process of rebranding at the moment. I've also worked for the Spearfish Sasquatch and I have a couple of exciting projects with them planned throughout the year, so I want to keep them in this current demo reel. And I've recently done a lot of work with Rapid City Rush, so I have a little bit of footage that I would like to include from them as well. And so, like I always say, it's very, very important to start anything that you ever do with the end in mind. And so that's the big reason why I wrote this out. I write this out every year to kind of get an idea of what I want to make sure my demo reel gets across. And for this one, we're going to aim for about 45 seconds in length. And I'll also do a longer demo reel that'll be about 2 to 2.5 minutes. And that will give me a chance to showcase the secondary pieces of footage that I mentioned earlier. So this primary demo reel, the 45-second one, will include mostly my primary focal points, and the longer version will include my secondary focal points as well. And the reason why I'm doing two separate ones is I can catch people's attention with a quick 45-second demo reel that I can put everywhere that I wish. And then if they want to know more about my business, that will draw them to the longer version. Also, say theoretically, I wanted to sponsor a sports team or vice versa. A lot of the time, they have 30 seconds per ad read. So I need something available that I can send to clients like that, that they would be able to read or go through in about 30 to 45 seconds. So it's good to have two different representations of your work at two different lengths, at least in my opinion. So with that being said, I have all of these clients and kind of an idea of what I want to focus on. So I cheated a little bit prior to this, and I did some of the setup work of going through my old footage and putting it into Premiere Pro already, and I'll show you guys how to do that as well. But whenever I start on a project, I always have usually 3 or 4 bins of different things, which is an audio bin, a bin for still images, and then I have a collection of moving footage and the video clips themselves that hang out in the bottom that I can click back and forth through and see, what I'd like to showcase in the future. And since I skipped the import process in order to save time, I'll just demonstrate how to do that real quick. So you would just go into File, and you go down to Import, click Import, select whatever file you would like to import, and then click Open. At that point, it will display itself in the bins that you've set up. And then from there, you can use a preview monitor and your sequence monitor to make the actual project. And so the first thing I want to put in there is going to be, let's start with this still of my intro to videography graphic that I have right there. And a lot of this, guys, is really experimenting and deciding what flow you want to end up on. And, you kind of go back and forth between different drafts of demo reels. And, through doing that, you're able to establish what kind of tone you want to set and the like. So I have this graphic that I would like to include, and then I also have a little animation of my business card, which I can drag and drop into the sequence folder. Oh, that file actually might have gotten moved in the process of doing testing. So I'm just going to skip over that and we're going to continue on. Instead of doing that, let's take a look at some of the audio clips I've selected. Now, unfortunately, you guys won't be able to hear this, but this is the background music I've selected for this. And it's important to usually start with your audio because audio will carry whatever visuals you put out into the world. Most of the time, people will put up with mediocre visuals if it's clearly understood and easily recognizable with audio. And at the very least, if your audio's of good quality, you can understand what you're trying to get across without even having to see it. So good audio is, in a lot of cases, more important than the actual video clips that you decide to put in to whatever project you're doing. And that applies to more than just demo reels. That's wedding videos, pretty much everything you need to put out into the world broadcast. Audio is super important. So like I said, unfortunately you guys can't hear this, but we're going to start by pulling the audio down. And I've already cut this to the section of the song that I would like to edit my demo reel to. And it is longer than my goal time by a significant margin, because the longest I tend to produce is around 2.5 minutes. But this way, by including the whole audio sample, I can kind of play with different lengths and cut together different sections of whatever I want to work on, and that sets the tone of what you would use. And so I have an audio bed laid down, and so since you can't hear this, I'll just kind of describe what I have going as an audio bed. It's an upbeat sort of like rock song, and it's very bass heavy, and so it has clear sections in which your brain tells your eyes to expect a cut. So in order to make that happen, it's really important to line your visuals up with what you hear. Otherwise, it tricks your body into building up anticipation that never comes. So in order to line the video up with the pacing of your audio, let me turn up my speakers on this device here quick. And then I will go over and showcase kind of what I've put together previously. Like I mentioned before in the checklist of my demo reel, I would like to primarily focus on my small business work. And so in that vein, I have completed pieces of small business work in my files, in my bins here. And so I'm going to take a look at the different projects I've completed in the past and kind of select the different pieces that I feel best represent them in a quick manner. So usually I look for the, best 5 seconds or so out of a project that I've done and use that as kind of a representation of that piece of work. Because if you only have 45 seconds to work with and you need to showcase all the clients that you've worked with in the past, unfortunately you can't dedicate tons of that time to just one or the other. So for good day, there is, oops, I'm editing on a trackpad, so please forgive finger slips and such. Oh, here we go. So I made a teaser for the cafe in Spearfish, and in that teaser, I have a really nice establishing shot of their logo, and I lost it. Where'd it go? Up here it is. All right. So I'm planning to use this little section of the commercial I made for Good Day Cafe. So I'll let that play out so you guys can see it. So that particular shot works really well for a demo reel because it's your source of branding. It's clear that this was for exactly what their logo is. It's a cafe that serves breakfast and the like. So you can see that little 5-second clip and your brain can make the connection of what business it was, regardless of if you've seen or heard of them in the past. So if I just drag that little section over, and I'm not really trying to establish a final product by any means. I will not even be able to come close to finishing an entire demo reel in this amount of time. I have about 2 hours. Rather, I just want to kind of establish what I'm looking for, show you guys some clips that I feel work well with what I want to explore in the future, and kind of demonstrate, what you should look for when constructing a demo reel for yourself. So yeah, like I said, this is a good 5-second clip to use because it's short, it's to the point, and it's a solid piece of branding. So I don't know what order or how I want to present this in the final project, but I do know that I want to use something like this. So that's one shot, and that's one piece of small business. Another piece of small business that I have close contact with is a tobacco store called Smokes and Things, Spearfish in Sturgis. And so I have plenty of footage throughout my time there as well. One of my favorite shots that we did during that is this piece right here.
All right, ready whenever
And this was shot by one of my close friends in college. His name's Logan Kurtenbach, and he's also a freelance videographer.
Perfect.
So we worked together and shot some
Whenever
pieces for Smokes and Things. This was one of them, and I think it just represents really nice. So the only problem with this is, although it's aesthetically pleasing and it fits the colors of the previous shot, etc., it doesn't, it's not clear what this represents. So this shot can't really stand on its own, and it needs more context to kind of establish where it came from. So we're going to cut it about when it comes into focus, about right there. So you push I in Adobe Premiere Pro to establish an end point, and I'll let it play through to where I want it to end. Should be right there. I'll pause it, then push O to establish an out point, and then I can click and drag the video over right into the timeline, and then you can see that it's just going to be a solid cut from this piece of Good Day Cafe footage into the Smokes and Things footage. And so that's the simplest cut that I can possibly demonstrate. And this by no means is, like I said, anywhere close to the finished product. I'm just kind of laying out what I for sure want to include. And another key point of my outline was a lot of work with the Cave Collective. And so I have a promo that I did for them wow, that was 2 months ago already. Time flies. But so I'm gonna pull that up and we're gonna take a couple key pieces there. And I'm not even at this point paying attention to properly syncing the audio. I'm just laying it out on the timeline, mostly for demonstrational purposes. But I like this opening shot here, and so that's pretty strong, and I might use that as well. I also like this shot
Welcome
coming
to the
up
Cave
of
Collective, a
the
nonprofit,
opening of the
youth-driven,
coffee
all-inclusive community
into an
center.
establishing shot of the
We
building.
make a great cup of coffee and so much
that's
more.
Another contender.
The Cave Collective is truly a space for everyone.
But if I had to choose a section to use, I would probably go from here.
The Cave Collective is truly a space for everyone.
Let it play.
We allow
through
safe space where ideas flow freely, stories are heard with intention and respect, and lifelong friendships are sparked.
Here,
come rock out with local and
and so that piece will look like this. And like I said, demo reels represent you as a videographer, so you need to kind of balance and front load what you think is the most important. That should take up the majority of the time that you plan to use. And so this is going to change quite a lot between the time that I have to go and the time that it will be finished. But already, I have about 30 seconds worth of footage, and that's 2 small businesses and the Cave Collective in terms of just a shot breakdown. And so the one piece that I'm missing out of my key focal points for the 45-second clip is some live production. And so I have a couple shots from the Rapid City Rush because that qualifies as live production work that I can use. Now this is a longer clip. It's a goal that was scored just the other day. And I filmed this while I was working for Destin Human at 605 Media. And 605 is a friend of the Cave. So shout outs to those guys, and I appreciate the opportunity to come in and help you guys out, film some hockey. So yeah, this was some hockey footage from just the other day. And there's a goal that's going to come up here shortly. Right there it is. Okay, so we're going to have some lead up to that goal. Puts it in, celebration. And then we're going to let it carry on. And through to returning to the bench. And feel free to mention if I'm going too fast or too slow through some of these. You know, some questions on pacing and things like that are be appreciated. Oh, my computer's telling me that I need to restart it for an audio update. I'm going to cancel that and we'll update it later. So just ignore that. But yeah, please tell me where I sit and if all this makes sense. Like I said, right now it's just kind of establishing what I want to include, what I can go without, etc. And back to my focal points in my checklist here. Those are more or less little bits of my 3 focal points that I wanted to get across. Keep in mind that the finished product is going to look very different, and it's going to take a lot of polishing time to get to that point. But I'm just kind of laying out what I want to work on down the road. And then my plan is to come back when this is done, my next live stream, and I'll go through from here and I'll demonstrate the end product, and then I'll show you the timeline and how I got from just the bare bones skeleton to the finished product. So when that comes up, please let me know. And yeah, so those are 3 clients that I want to feature. They're laid out, and already that's at my 45-second mark. So that's pretty close to the end goal that I want to look at. It's 42 seconds, but like I said, it's kind of irrelevant at this moment because I'm laying out pieces of footage that I want to work on later. So in my sub points, I have some real estate, some weddings, some photo, and some small films, short films, and skits. And so, correlating to the plan I set out earlier, I have some real estate footage. I have a wedding video. And here this weekend, I'm working on a skit that I would like to put in. So, as mentioned earlier, in a demo reel, since you don't have a lot of time, it's important to pick the best representations of that particular project and put those front and center. And so I'd say the best 2 shots I have of this wedding video that would also establish that it is a wedding video
I'm so
would be
thankful
this
to have
one.
you in my life and in my...
Oops. We're going to back up a bit. I missed the cut.
I'm so
I like this shot.
thankful to have you in my life and in
Back it up a bit. And this wedding was a wedding that I did for one of my best friends from high school. So, shout outs to you, Brianna, if you're watching. So I like this shot. It's a nice little self-explanatory establishing shot. And we can also throw in,
God willing,
a
you will be the
dance.
best father to our 7 children.
And we'll throw that in there. And then from another wedding, I have a nice little piece of B-roll that seems like it would flow nicely. And so, if I were not to do any sort of editing or work at all, you can still establish that these 3 clips are from a wedding. So yeah, again, to just kind of reiterate, the point of a demo reel is just to kind of demonstrate what you've already done in a quick and efficient way. And so by kind of having a plan going into it of what you want to represent yourself with, that's 80 to 90% of the battle. And the rest of it is really just kind of fine tweaking and finding a pace that you want to put out into the world. And let me see if I can actually find my business card, because I have a little clip of an animation for my business card, and I seem to have lost. Doesn't surprise me at all. I tend to lose a lot of things, but that's okay. Some things never change. And I have another couple bits of B-roll from weddings I could use if I'd like. But I'm going to have to go into my files and track this thing down. Oh, also for the record, video takes up a lot of storage space on your devices. So I recommend having at least a handful of external storage. So I have a larger piece of external storage that's 4 terabytes, and I use this for completed projects and bulk. So essentially this is raw footage and things like that, categorized and what have you. And it's brand new, so I'm still in the process of like organizing and things like that. But most of it's under work, and then this is kind of folders for the different clients that I have that I'm currently working on. So this is where I actively work out of. And then this holds, which is a 1 terabyte drive. This is some of my older work. This is like less neat because I've had it for longer and it's kind of collecting files at this point, as you can see. But I know that my business card animation is in here, so we're gonna find that quick. Should be under resume, demo reels. Yep, business card animation. Would you look at that? And so it's a nice quick little, just flash the lights there of my business card. And we're gonna throw that at the end. And so, you know, it's been 30 minutes since I've started doing this, and like I said, this is nowhere close to the final project, but even just with simple cuts, you can kind of see what I do and how I want to represent myself just by what's displayed. So the first 2 pieces are from small businesses, and that makes up the majority of what I have in my demo reel. This is over half of the time. And I'm going to add another piece from Smokes and Things as well, so they can have some establishment of where that came from instead of just the person putting away product. And then it goes into the Cave Collective and some sports broadcast. And like I said, these are just straight cuts right now, and we're just establishing a flow for what I want at the end of the day. Oh, looks like we need to resize that. So if anything comes up like this in your timeline, at least in Adobe Premiere Pro, that means that this particular file is smaller than your overall sequence. So if you were to export this and put it out into the world, you'd get to this and all of a sudden your video would be super, super small. That's because the resolution of the sequence that I'm working on is 1920 by 1080. That's standard high definition. And this is significantly smaller than that. So ideally, you have larger files that you would shrink down because it doesn't lose any quality, but just for the time being, until I can find my source file, I will just right click and I will go to set frame size, and that will scale it up. And now the reason why you want to avoid scaling up instead of scaling down is because it stretches the pixels on your video and it washes it out and distorts it. Versus if you have a larger file that you're shrinking, it still keeps all of the quality of the pixels, it just condenses them. And so that's why like 4K and different things like that have kind of been buzzwords. If you walk down Walmart and you go through TVs and cameras, they'll always tout 4K resolution and different things like that. Essentially what that means is the size of the image that they're able to output and the amount of pixels that they can display at a given time. It makes a difference in video quality, but it is not the sole determinant of video quality by any means. And a common misconception is that if a video isn't sharp, it's just because the resolution's too low, and that's not always the case. So yeah, at this point, I'm just going to kind of play with the durations of these clips, and then we're going to sync it to my audio that I've selected, my music, and then we'll make it flow smooth and do a whole bunch of things to this between now and the next time you'll see it. So I'm going to kind of cut this down. The Good Day Cafe is a little bit longer than I'd like in relation to the rest of the clips. So we're gonna cut it when it reestablishes focus here. There's a point in this video where it kind of goes out of focus and back in right there. So if I just cut it when it goes back into focus, it'll save me about 5 seconds. So just for redundancy's sake, the razor tool is right here, and you can use that to just cut into your videos. And now these are two separate clips, and I can select the first clip and delete that, and now all that's available is this piece. So that's significantly shorter, but it doesn't match the pacing of what I'm going for. So I will just slightly increase the speed. So to do that, you just right click on your piece of video, and oops, misclick. My trackpad's fighting me. And you go into speed duration, and let's try 125%. Whoop, not 1012%. That would be ridiculously fast. And that's the simplest way to speed up a clip. It's not going to be how I do it in the final piece. I'm actually going to keyframe the speed ramp and have more precise control over when I want it to speed up, when I want to slow it down. But that's just purely for demonstrational purposes. Also, you need to be very careful when you mess with the speed of video clips, because it can mess with how it is displayed and perceived by your eyes. It will distort the relation between your frame rate and your shutter speed, and a lot of the times that means that it'll look really funky if you speed it up way too far, and you'll start skipping frames and different things like that. Actually, while I'm on that, let me just move this back. I'll demonstrate that real quick. So, yeah, I caught myself. I was definitely going a little too fast through that. And so this is a normal speed clip that I just showed. Okay, and that very much, as you would expect, that matches with, what you would expect to see somebody move like. And it also is smooth in terms of the frames that are displayed. So you're not getting any hitching, you're not skipping frames, anything like that. But if I were to take this, which if I go into properties, you can see that it was shot at 24 frames a second. If I were to take this and speed it up significantly, so let's go back into speed duration, and we'll make it go 3 times as fast. And then we'll watch it again. Okay, so I know that was quick, but not only was it significantly faster, but if you watch it again and you watch closely, you can see that the motion's no longer smooth. So here's frame by frame. So a hand comes in, picks up the orange juice, and pours it. Right? It's relatively smooth, but you can see that the distance between frames is increasing, and it looks a little bit unnatural. You see that? There's a little bit of hitch there. And it looks like her hand is teleporting in frame. So to expound on that even further, let's speed it up to ridiculous levels. Let's do 9 times the original speed. And at this point, you can no longer see the immediate. Her hand just kind of appears. And you can see that in the frame by frame. That's one frame. And in the very next frame, her hand has already grabbed the jug of orange juice. So when you watch that in real time, her hand just kind of shows up out of nowhere. Now, you can, if you shot with the proper camera on the proper settings, you can speed up or slow down video to that extent. But you need a camera that's capable of shooting at really fast frames per second, and that's how really fast things are displayed in slow motion. If you ever watch a channel on YouTube called the Slow Mo Guys, they kind of go over and they shoot a whole bunch of goofy things with high-speed cameras, and you can see a bullet fly through the air in super slow motion, and it's super clear, and there's no artifacting like I just demonstrated. That's because the cameras that they use are really expensive and can shoot at really fast frame rates, and then since they have more frames to work with, they can slow it down and speed it up without losing any of the information in between. So let's set that back to normal speed. I'm going to check really quick the live feed and see if there's any questions. So give me a second while I do that. I don't see any questions, so I'll just continue on. So we set it back to normal speed. We have sort of a rough idea of at least the ratios of everything that I want to include. And we have a music bed. So now, at this point, it's hard to believe, but there's still probably, I'd say anywhere between 8 to 12 hours of work to do in order to refine this to a professional level. And when I go through and look at the end result, I'll kind of explain why that is. At this point, you know, if I were to be actively working on my demo reel, I would really weigh what I want to put in, what I want to take out. I would cut them very closely with the music, add things like transitions, things like that. But for now and for demonstrational purposes, I'm just going to leave it like this. And to give kind of a break from the info dump, I'm actually going to go through and find the poster that I worked on in my last live stream, because that's completed now, and I'll show that to you guys. So that is under the Cave Collective over here. It should be one of the bottom files. Yep. So the last live stream, if you guys watch that, I started working on this poster that I used to advertise for my videography classes that start tomorrow. Which is crazy. I'm super excited for that, and I hope you guys tag along on this journey with me as, you know, I share what I know and learn things along the way as well. But yeah, I started with the bones and the skeleton of this poster that I ended up with. And so I'll go through and kind of explain what I started with and what I showed you guys in the first live stream and what I added between then and the finished product. So the first time I showed how to make these little film negative frames that I have here. And that was simply putting green bars into Photoshop and then cutting squares through them, using that to frame photos that I've taken and arranging them. I also went through a little bit of color theory and the importance of using complementary colors and keeping your color palette to a minimum in order to emphasize the information that you need to get across. So I know that sounds like really complicated, but basically all that means is if you use complementary colors, it's easy for your eyes to read what's going on. So if you look at this, your brain tells you to look right at the center of the screen. That's right at the most important piece of information. And it's just videography classes that states what the poster is about. Immediately underneath that, you can see when and where. And then in the bottom corner, you have all the information. And so, would I call this an excellent piece of graphic design? You know, no. But it gets across what it needs to get across. And at the end of the day, if you make your clients happy, that's all it needs to do. So nothing fancy here, but it's readable and it's understandable what it represents. And that's the most important part. In video, photo, whatever, it's just really important to make sure that what you put together matches your end goal. And that's why I always say, you know, regardless of what it is, you should always plan things out, script it out, and etc. if I wanted to, especially with a demo reel, I can kind of just jump into it and throw things at the wall, tweak it, and I would end up with something okay, but I couldn't guarantee that it would represent exactly what I want it to. And so, you know, I think, at least in my opinion, writing down even the small things that you work on makes it easier for you to ensure that it does meet your goals. And so, having this kind of serves as a point that like tells you, okay, I've met my criteria that I set out to do. I can export this and put it into the world. Because if I don't do this, and perfectionism is pretty common, so I'm sure some of you guys can relate to this, but when I start working on a project, it's hard to really know when to stop and when to know when something's good enough. So if you set out goals before you even start, you kind of have a hard stop already in that, and once you meet those, you can put it out into the world and know 100% that it meets what you wanted to. And you don't have to, sit there and question, well, what if I did this? What if I did this? Because you can do that all day, and at the end of that cycle, you'll end up just making small changes that don't really have a large impact on the finished product. So, and I'm not saying that, small changes and tweaks are insignificant, but it's just it's a time saver if you're able to, have an end goal. Because once you meet that, you can say, well, okay, yes, I can change this, I can change that, but it still gets done when I wanted it to get done. And so, with that, and going back into my demo reel, or my skeleton of a demo reel, I should say, I can tweak things as I go. And keep in mind, like I mentioned, these clips are just, examples that I pulled in order to kind of, explain what I look for when I put together a demo reel. But, as a videographer, I'll just show you real quick. I have much more I can pick from in terms of raw footage and all the things that I can pull from my past, what I've done. This is just exclusively from Smokes and Things. This is a lot of different files that I can choose from if I don't like one versus the other. And as a matter of fact, while I'm here, I do need a piece of footage that establishes more context than just the pipe being put away on the shelf. So let's grab a piece of branding from Smokes and Things that I've done. Now I can go the route and just put a still up, something like this. But that very much messes with the pace of what I have established already, because you would go from moving picture to moving picture, all of a sudden it would stop. So I have that, and I would still use it, but if I were to use this in a demo reel, I would add some motion to it so it's not quite as jarring. And again, this is entirely just like, my opinions and what I would use. Some people use a lot of stills in their demo reel, and in my previous demo reel, I have a collection of stills myself because, at that point, coming directly out of college, I needed a little bit more filler in between the pieces of video, and so stills was a good way to do that. But now I have enough strictly video that I wouldn't need to do this. But in case you do, in my opinion, it's jarring to go from any sort of motion. I'll just demonstrate that. So there's lots of smooth motion going on between these clips all of a sudden, boom, hard stop. And that's kind of jarring. So we're going to throw this back. Oops. I'm going to back that up. I'm going to throw this back. And we'll put it next to the other piece of smokes and things. Boom. Which is clear back here. Okay, that's the second piece. So I'm going to click and drag, grab all my pieces, separate that, click and drag, boom. And right now, it goes from putting away the pipe right into a piece of branding, no motion, nothing. So in order to add some motion into a still, and again, this isn't going to be in the final project, it's just a good piece of demonstration. I double clicked on the piece that I want to edit, and now I can go in and I can look at the keyframes by going into effects. Oops, let me reselect that again. And under effects, I can go into effect controls, click on the piece that I want to look at, and now this effects controls panel allows me to edit specifics about any clip that I want. So as you can see, just by default, you can adjust the motion, which is the position and the scale, as well as the rotation, the anchor point, etc. And basically, the position allows you to move things left, right, up, and down. So just like that. Your scale makes things bigger or smaller. And just like I mentioned with resolution earlier, this is dependent on the size of your file. So if I have a small file and I blow it up, make it really big, you can see that the pixels get stretched out and they aren't as sharp as they would be if they're at their original size. So a good kind of like visual metaphor to think about in relation to that is take a piece of plastic wrap and draw a stick figure on it. And then if you take that piece of plastic wrap and you stretch it out, that stick man will distort and get fuzzy and not look as good as if you had a larger undisturbed piece of footage in front of you. So, and on the inverse of that, if you took that same piece of plastic wrap, you had a very large one, and you simply just cut off the edges, which would make it smaller, it would still retain the same image quality. But, so that's where you adjust your position and your scale that makes it bigger or smaller. So, we're going to use these two components and keyframe them to make a little bit of motion. So how I would do that is go to the start of your clip, and you click this little stopwatch that toggles the animation and establishes a keyframe, which tells your computer, okay, at this point on your timeline, I want this photo to be exactly right here. And then you go along and you move it a little bit, and we'll establish a scale keyframe as well. So let me do that quick. So I have a keyframe for position and scale. And so again, that tells the computer, okay, at this point in the timeline, I want this photo to be at this spot in this size. So if I move it forward and I tell the computer, okay, now at this point in time, I want it to be bigger and I want it to move to the left and up, just ever so slightly. And I'm trying to frame the Smokes and Things logo. Now I have two keyframes that start here and go here. And all that is it's telling the computer where you want your size and scale of things to be when you start and when you end. And that's all that is. So even just that, I'll slow it down quite a bit. And we're gonna pull it out this way. So even just that is sort of an artificial zoom. And if I were to watch that back in relation to the rest of my clips, I have smooth motion and all the rest of them, etc., etc. And when I get to this still image, it's not quite as shocking as it was just to go into complete stillness. So that helps quite a bit, but it's still not optimal. It's still not what I'd like it to look like. And you can make it look smoother by right-clicking on the keyframes that you have selected. You can go into temporal interpolation, which that's word salad right there. And then you can go to continuous, and I'm not even going to make an effort to announce that because I have no idea. All I know is that tells your computer to kind of ease into and out of the transition that you've made with your keyframes. So instead of going to this point and abruptly stopping, it'll just ever so slightly ease out of it. And there's a little bit of hitching there because I haven't rendered this piece of footage, but that helps a little bit as well. And every little tweak you can make like that makes a big difference. But like I said, that's not necessarily what I want to go for. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. That was just a decent teachable moment while I was on that subject. So if I go back and I look through my other pieces of footage from Smokes and Things, I have a couple things that I can grab. And actually, we're going to pull the completed file that Logan and I worked on, because I have this shot in mind of the staff at the store coming in, turning around, and it focuses on Terry here and fades to black. So if I go from here
together we are family owned and look
to
forward
there,
to seeing you.
And then there's a slow push in here, right to there. That provides more context to this piece from earlier. So it's a quick little mental question and answer. You can either have this piece of footage first, see the pipe being put away, and then your mind will ask itself, okay, what's this for? And then you see this turn around into Smokes and Things, and then, it makes sense. Oh, that's from a tobacco store. If you recognize the brand. And if you inverse that, it's the opposite. You can see, okay, another client I've worked for is Smokes and Things. And then it would go straight into pipe. And actually, in order to conserve time, I might entirely get rid of that segment with the pipe. Actually, I like that quite a bit better. So we're gonna pull everything sort of back to where it was. And so we're gonna start with good day. Go straight into smokes and things. Right into the cave. Into the rush. And a handful of wedding clips. So, with very little effort, I've at least established, what I want to represent in the future. And this is, like I mentioned, nowhere near the end product, and it's going to be a lot smoother. And you'll see how significant the addition of being able to hear the music, what that makes into the final product. And like I mentioned earlier, audio really helps guide your visuals. It's another way that your brain tells your body, okay, like something significant should change here. And if that doesn't happen, it throws people like in kind of a subconscious loop. It freaks them out a little bit. And so yeah, using just like super basic tools, nothing that I've went over, I would consider to be, extremely in depth by any means. Aside from maybe keyframing, but yeah, I already have kind of a very rough outline of what I want to establish. So I'll just kind of continue tweaking what I'm working on and talking you guys through that. Again, if you guys, have any questions, comments, or you just want to mess with me, have a little bit of fun, feel free to do that. It helps things go along and a little bit smoother for me if I have some live feedback. So at this point, just for demonstrational purposes, I'll go through and talk about like some transitions and things like that that are super common to throw into various pieces of footage. So one of those is a simple fade to and from black. So in Adobe Premiere Pro, it's under the effects panel that I was in earlier. You type in dip into the effects rack right up here. And what you're looking for is dip to black. And so this will take it from a black screen to whatever you have underneath it. And you can make adjustments as to how long you want the fade to last. So if I wanted to, just for demonstration purposes, make it super long, I'd set it to 5 seconds, which is an extremely long fade from black. But it'll kind of slowly pull up from black screen to whatever is put in front of you. So that's a really common transition. So you can fade, in from black, and you can fade out to black at the end. It does the same thing, just inversed. And you also have the option of doing that same thing, but from white, which is pretty self-explanatory. So if I pulled in dip to white, did the same thing, comes from a white screen into whatever you'd like. You can also make this artificially by making a color overlay graphic and fading it in and out. Another super common transition is a cross dissolve. So under your effects rack, you go into cross dissolve. And this is a fade from one clip of video to another. So we'll go from there and then fade into the clip that follows it. Oh, let me go back into my timeline. So you see how this becomes more and more transparent as the other one comes in. Boom. That's used in movies and TV shows, what have you, all the time. Me personally, at least in a demo reel, I'm a fan of just hard cuts because a crossfade sort of represents more or less a passage of time. You know, seeing that tells your brain, oh, okay, something happened in between now and then, which isn't always the case. So if you don't want to imply that, just go with solid, straight cuts. You can also get really fancy and make your own transitions with the tools in Premiere Pro. I have an example of something that I've made under the Cave Collective video, which I gotta find in my bin here. Where'd you go? Oh, right there it is. Here's the final cut. And I'm not going to bother pulling this into the timeline, but during one of these clips, I have a preset transition that I made.
Professionals and tutors in publicly open spaces, play games and social.
And the screen kind of glitches out and goes from one shot to the other. And I did that using various effects found in the effects bar. I think one of them was, oops. One of them was this glitch one. And essentially, it was that, but I went into the effects controls and just adjusted when and where and for how long I wanted this to take effect. So I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller, I can make it come in like that, circle, I can do all sorts of things. But the reason why I'm showing you guys this is one of the easiest ways to learn is just to simply start a project and start playing. I can't tell you how many different things that I've kind of picked up over the years just by being curious and looking at like the new tools and things like that. As strange as it sounds, you know, view this as a toy box, guys. If you get curious and you want to learn something, just play with it. And never ever, regardless of what you do in life, don't be afraid to fail because you have to start somewhere. And every experience should be a learning experience, and it will be if you're not afraid to try new things. So, you know, if you see something in a TV show or on YouTube, what have you, ask yourself, oh, do I have the tools to do that? And if you do, you might as well just go out, take your camera, make a sample shot, and see if you can replicate it. That's one of the easiest ways to learn. And, you can end up creating some really cool things doing that. But yeah, there's so many different effects, guys, under Premiere Pro's belt of different things that they offer. And it expands all the time, and that's the beauty of a subscription service. But I'm a little Premiere Pro biased. But I have about 40 minutes left. So instead of just going into specifics or anything like that, I'll give you guys a brief overview of what I'll do between now and the next time I'm back and you see the final cut. To make it go from this, which is very low effort and just, a demonstration of kind of the pacing and the flow I'm looking for. And I'll go over the different steps I'll take to kind of refine it. So the first thing, like I mentioned, is really carefully syncing your visuals to your audio. Like I said, good audio will oftentimes carry video, and you'll lose people faster if you have poor audio versus poor visuals. People will put up with poor visuals, but they won't listen to something that sounds terrible, for the most part, as a rule of thumb. You want to have both be good, but if you had to choose one over the other, having clear audio in most cases is the most important. In broadcast, especially, audio is important because the second you lose video, your announcers or what have you can still carry the program and you can understand what's going on. Radio existed for decades and decades before video did. And that's how people got all the information they ever wanted was through the radio. And so, yeah, really work on listening to the fine details of your audio. Make sure it sounds clear. Make sure it paces itself well with what you want to get across. And then you go in and select a piece of music or what have you that matches what you want to represent yourself with. And I'm sorry that you guys can't hear this, but like I said, this is like sort of faster paced, upbeat piece of rock music that I'll edit this to. And once this is done, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I'll put this on my pages and you guys can see what I ended up on. And hopefully, it's good enough to make you guys, really understand the importance of fine tuning things. Because if I put this out in its state right now, I wouldn't impress very many people. There's a lot of work to be done. So that's audio and the importance of audio. And that in itself, is its own class that you can take and get a master's degree in. But as a videographer, it's important to have at least above average understanding of it. I wouldn't say you'd have to be an expert by any means, but just understand that in a lot of circumstances it's more important than your visuals. And that's not always the case. And the inverse is true as well. Silent films were a thing for a very long time. But even those usually had like musical accompaniment and things like that. So yeah, first thing I'm going to do is really carefully fine tune my audio. I might add in a vocal bed of saying like, hey, my name's Wyatt Bills. This is my company. This is what I do. This is what I can provide, etc. But in all likelihood, at least for the shorter version, I will just keep it with the music bed and demonstrations for visuals just because it's the easiest to understand. For my longer version that I'm going to put out, I'd be more tempted to go over and, have a voiceover. So that's gonna be the first thing that I do. Second thing is, make sure it matches your audio first and foremost. And then you want to make sure that each of the clips that you have look as good and as uniform as they possibly can. So I'm going to save this before I do this because this is what would be considered a destructive edit. And so I saved there because, if I mess something up, I can revert back to the previous save. So keep in mind, don't do anything that you need to change later if you don't save beforehand because you will lose a lot of work. And I've definitely done that once or twice as well. But yeah, in order to make things look as, appealing as they possibly can, you're going to want to adjust the visuals a little bit. And most of this is just raw footage that hasn't gone through a color grading process and can be improved quite a bit with just some small tweaks. So let's find a kind of a flat, unedited piece of footage. And some of this is color graded slightly and things like that. This one has a, pretty significant purple color grade that's, present in the final product, so we're not going to touch that quite yet. This piece would probably be the flattest visually that I can think of. So, I have a piece of footage here, and I have a visual representation of all my colors here. And I have a bunch of options to adjust different things that correspond to the videos. So I'm under the Colors tab in Premiere Pro. And the first thing we're going to do is go under Basic Correction. And we're going to just make very small adjustments to these. But the first thing that you should always do is make sure it's properly white balanced. And what white balance is it's your camera's representation of what it believes is white, what should be white. And so what that changes visually is if your camera is in a very orange or blue environment, it'll try and compensate for that. And sometimes it doesn't guess as correctly as it should if it's not calibrated properly. And so this needs to be changed in post to make things as color accurate as possible. So just as a demonstration, I'm going to go into the white balance selector, and you're going to want to try and find the most neutral piece of color you possibly can, which would be this gray wall here. We're going to click that, and you can see that it went from slightly orange to a little bit cooler, and this is a more accurate representation of the colors of these actual shirts that they're wearing right now. So if I reset that so you guys can look at the original piece, we'll set this to 0 again, and 0 again. You can see that it looks like there's sunlight coming in, which is the case, and it turns things a little bit orange a lot. But when you work with color grading, you want to make sure that everything is as consistent as possible. And the best way to do that is to make sure that your white balance is correct on all of your pieces of footage, and then you can go in and make the same color adjustments across the board. So now that this is nicely white balanced, in order to not make further adjustments directly to this video clip and edit non-destructively, which means that you can make changes to this down the road, and if you screw it up, it's easy to fix, versus if you make mistakes on a piece of footage that you need to keep, it's a lot harder to change. So you don't want to ruin your own work. And a good way to avoid that is to work on layers that are separate from your clips. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to add an adjustment layer, which is under new item, go into adjustment layer, and it'll default to the same size as your timeline. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to drag and drop that over the piece of video that I'm working on. And we're going to zoom in. And so now I have a separate layer that I can work on that doesn't attach itself to my actual clip. So using, the plastic wrap and stretching resolution analogy, think of your layers in any sort of like digital format, whether that be Photoshop, Premiere Pro, any sort of editing tools really. Think of them as separate individual pieces of plastic wrap that you layer over top of another. If I draw one stick man on the bottom layer of plastic wrap, and I draw another stick man on the top layer of plastic wrap, and overlay them together, you see two stick people on one plane, right? But they're still two separate images. So you can make adjustments to the top layer or the bottom layer without them affecting the overall piece. So if I did that, I can now make the same color adjustments to this top layer, and I can feel free to delete it, change it, whatever. And then if I want to just divert it back to what it was before I made any edits, all I would do is simply delete it. And then I'm back to where I started, and I can go from there. You can also, I've seen people make several different adjustment layers as they go, and they can color grade in different styles and then compare back and forth between one or the other. And the process of color grading, again, is a whole lecture that I could go through, but the purpose of these live streams is just to get kind of an overview idea of what these concepts are. So I'm going in, taking a look at my white balance piece of footage. So I know it's, it's probably not perfectly color accurate, but it's comfortably accurate enough to where I can adjust it without worrying about messing other things up. So exposure is the overall light or dark levels of an image. If you take your exposure and you pull it all the way down, it's going to be dark. If you take your exposure and you pull it all the way up, it's going to be very, very bright. You're going to miss details in the lighter portions of your shots, etc., etc. And again, keep in mind this is considered post-production. So most of your exposure you should already take into account before you even record on your camera. And when you record on your camera, you should try and expose as even of an exposure on your histogram as you possibly can. You don't want to clip any of your highlights. You don't want to lose any of your shadows, because once those are gone, you won't be able to make the adjustments that I am right now, and I won't be able to pull any detail back. But, where I shot it is good because, like I said, it's an evenly distributed histogram, so I have a lot of leeway in both the lights and the darks to work with. And so even though it's not where I want it to be, now I have more flexibility either way to make those adjustments. So I'm going to just brighten it up ever so slightly. And so that's a little bit brighter than it was previously, and I think it looks a little bit nicer. And let's see, I'm losing a little bit of detail in this red shirt here. So I'm going to go through and just kind of play with these sliders. So the highlights are the bright parts of your image. Your shadows are the dark parts of your image. Your whites are exactly what it says, and that's the brightest parts of your image possible. It's the upper end of your histogram. And your blacks is the opposite. It's the lowest part of your histogram, and it represents the darkest portions of your visual. So I like the idea of bringing the blacks down just a little bit. I'm going to even this back out so you can see what I do one thing at a time. So we're going to bring the blacks down, provide a little bit more contrast with the logos on the back. And the whites, let's see what that looks like if I were to play with that. We're going to brighten that up a bit because, again, provides a little bit more contrast in the shirts, which is your focal point of the shot. Play with the shadows. We're going to bring the shadows up just a bit. I like the way that the red shirt looks. If you bring up the shadows a touch, do the same with the highlights. Kind of roll them back and forth, see what you like to land on. And look and roll through the contrast. And I like it about there. And so, like, color grading in this whole process is entirely subjective. My process of color grading would be entirely different if somebody else were to do it. And that's totally fine. And that's part of what makes you unique from other people that do this. You know, you're not going to look like James Cameron, and that's fine, you know, because it allows you to kind of separate yourself from the crowd and say, okay, if you hire me, you can expect it to look like this. And if they like that, you know, they will hire you over someone else. And so if you color grade it exactly like, you know, everybody that you came across, you wouldn't be able to distinguish yourself and, you know, take a part of the market and establish yourself and get clients and, you know, things like that. So yeah, that's basic correction. And then, you know, you would kind of go through and do similar things to each of these pieces of adjustments of color. I don't have enough time to go through all of them, but under the creative section, you can add a color tint to the highlights and the shadows. So if I wanted to have some warm highlights, or this is shadows, if I wanted to bring the shadows and make them a little bit cooler and the highlights a little bit warmer. That's a blue and orange color palette. And let me make that really extreme so I can, just for sake of demonstration purposes. So you can see that, you know, messing with these colors makes a significant impact on what you want. So you sit here and you dial in exactly what you want your final image to look like. And just this process will take, you know, a couple hours. But again, we're closing in on 20 minutes until open mic. starts. So we'll just leave it like that for now. And so at this point, you would have edited your visuals to your audio. You'd have make sure that it paces itself well and that it represents what you want to do. You've color graded it. And so, at this point, you would start making fine-tuned adjustments. And, those things could be shaving fractions of a second off of video clips, making transitions, adding graphics in, audio bugs, whatever you'd like to change. Also, side note, look at how satisfying the scopes are in the corner here. Like, if you've ever just wanted to watch something really trippy, just put together, a quick timeline and watch the color spectrum change. Especially in, really vibrant shots, I think, just watching these move back and forth is really, really pleasing. I could do that all day, really. So I won't go into exactly what those scopes mean and what they represent quite yet, because again, I don't have time. But essentially, it's the different levels of the different colors that you have present. So this is a very colorful shot versus this one. It only has a few tones in there right now. So you can see there's a bunch of different colors here, and then a handful here. Which doesn't necessarily mean that one looks better than the other, they just look different, which is fine. So there's some color grading. Big keys there are to edit non-destructively on layers and play with all of your settings. Learn what these mean as well. You shouldn't necessarily just slide sliders back and forth like I was doing for demonstration purposes. Try and make an effort to understand exactly what you're adjusting, because if you know what each of those do, you can fix problems. So say, if I had the saturation up way, to the extreme, I can say, wow, his t-shirt is super, super vibrant, and sometimes that'll mess with the exposure, different things like that. It drastically changes skin tone. And so if it was, more heavily saturated than I'd like, I can go, oh, okay, that's the saturation, and I can pull it back into something that I'm more comfortable with. And same with literally any of these adjustments, if the highlights were clipped, for example, it would look something like this. Whoop, and this is going to be pretty extreme. But if I were to shoot something like this in camera, there's no way that I would get any of this detail back, regardless of how hard you try. But, since it's shot properly, I can take a look at this and go, wow, okay, that is very bright on, every end of the spectrum that you can possibly think of. So you'd start with your exposure, bring that down to a comfortable level. Already that looks leagues better, right? And you go, okay, the highlights are still very, very vibrant, and you're losing detail in them. So you're going to bring that back down. Same process with the whites. And you just kind of play with them until you're comfortable. And then it looks a lot better than when you started. Okay, so that's just very basic color grading. And I would do this for each of the shots here. And then for clips like this, I'll more than likely add in an audio bed. I know, for example, on this clip, there's a goal horn that's nice and punchy. So it would be, a good thing to, double up on the fact and reinforce with your ears what's going on that you see with your eyes. So, you watch a goal happen, you hear a goal horn, you say, okay, something happened. So yeah, I would go through and add audio punches. I'd go through and work on some transitions possibly, and I'd color grade the whole thing. And more or less, that's the beauty of a demo reel, is most of the hard work of going out and planning your shoots and shooting them and etc. is already done. So you have to just go through the regular everyday process of editing and making sure it ties together visually. So yeah, again, like I said, there's still a lot of work to do between now and the finished product, but hopefully that gives you guys kind of an idea of the different things that goes along on a timeline, and more specifically making a demo reel. So now if I were to go and I go through my checklist that I made earlier, I'd say, okay, does this showcase my previous work while paying close attention to what I want to focus on in the future? And I'd look back into my project here and I'd say, yes, okay, this is all work I've done previously, and it's proportioned in a way that represents what I want to continue doing versus what I can provide but I don't necessarily focus on. And then I go through the checklist again and I'd say, okay, does it primarily feature small business work? Yes. Does it at least represent a little bit of live production? Yes. Is there a lot of stuff from the cave in there? Yes. And then I would go into my secondary list and I'd say, okay, like of these things, if I need it, what do I want to add? And what I added in there was some clips from weddings. Because these aren't only like aesthetically pleasing, but it's easily recognizable. And then do I have representation from my clients in here? And all but one of them, which I will add in, at a later time, do. I have representation from Smokes and Things, The Cave, Good Day, and The Rush. So if I look through my Sasquatch footage, I'll eventually, come up with a way to include all of those people in there. And then I also have branding for myself, which is my business card. So already, I've met the goals that I lined out. And so, with a little bit of fine tuning, I'm pretty confident that this will be pretty cool. And like I said, this is one of my favorite things to work on as a videographer, because all the hard work's done, and it's an excellent chance to kind of sit back and really make you appreciate what you've done throughout the course of the year. Sometimes you get in ruts where it doesn't feel like you're as productive as you should be, and then you go through and you do this, which makes you look at your previous work, and then you say, oh, okay, I actually accomplished more than I thought, which is a really good feeling. And so not only is it a good piece of, self-promotion, but for me at least, it serves as a confidence booster. And I say, wow, okay, I really did do a lot like this year. Or the inverse of that is say, oh, okay, I have a little bit, but next year I really want to shoot more things and, be a little bit more creative. Good piece of motivation. So yeah, essentially, that's the skeleton of a demo reel. And hopefully, what I have here, will be different enough from the finished product that, you guys will go, wow, okay, like, the small adjustments make a lot of difference. And so, like I said, once this is completed in a few weeks, I'll have it publicly available. And hopefully all you guys watch it and have fun, give me some feedback, etc. But with that being said, it is open mic night here at the cave. And so I have to clear out of my little corner here and let these guys do their thing, have a good time. And, if you're out there and you have a couple hours to kill, come on down, listen to some music, tell a few stories, whatever you'd like. That's the point of open mic night, is to, come express yourself in an open environment. So yeah, if that sounds something that you'd like to do, come stop by and say hi. And with that being said, thanks for listening, guys. And that's all I got. So thank you very much.